Sophie Hardy and the Battle of the Myriad by M.R. Dale, narrated by Leona Hall. Chapter 30. What's really going on? Standing round the room was now the comparatively huge number of 7 people: Sophie, Clara, Yasmin, Manita, Lizzie, Avatar Miss Sissons, and real Miss Sissons. Sophie couldn't help but think that they had the beginnings of a team coming together. Lizzie was still sat on her chair, but looked a lot calmer than when Sophie had left. "Well, this is an exceptional group of individuals," Miss Sissons said, enthusiastically. There was definitely a huge sense of pride in her voice, and Sophie noticed how Manita smiled and looked a bit embarrassed at the comment. "And we're still one missing," Sophie added, wanting to make sure that Kingsley got the credit they deserved as well. The real Miss Sissons began speaking, and her frail frame was supported by her own avatar. "I am truly sorry that I could not stop Mr. King from doing what he did to you, but he had a hold on me in a way that I won't bore you with now. Now you must look round at the glory and wonder that is Scope." Sophie could see Miss Sissons was slipping back into teacher mode. Her hands were all over the place with gesticulation, even with her frail frame, and she had a broad smile on her face, even though she was being propped up. She then caught sight of Manita looking remarkably unimpressed. "We've been here before," she kindly remarked, to persuade Miss Sissons to stop talking, because it was a bit embarrassing to be the centre of attention like that. Miss Sissons looked awkward for a second, and then looked to one of Sophie, Clara or Yasmin to save her. Clara obliged. "We too were brought together by King, but we disagree with how he did things. He lies to people to get what he wants, and he doesn't care about us. He just cares about his company and its image. If he cared about you, he would have helped you in some other way, not used you to help achieve what he wanted. Your online life might be better, but can you say your home life is compared to where you were before?" Yasmin added. "Are yours?" Manita asked, completely innocently, but Sophie didn't want to think about what the answer actually was to that question, and so she just smiled. Manita detected the awkward pause and pressed on. "What about the mythicals who aged us and took away all those people?" Manita asked. "She's gone. She banished herself to the underworld. The aging was done in order to prepare for a battle ahead, which now you have the option of helping to fight in," Sophie said, quickly thinking on her feet. Manita looked more confused than anything else now. She had been stopped from fighting in one battle to fight in another. Against what? "Another battle?" she asked. "That's a story for another time," Miss Sissons interjected, as she could see that Sophie was struggling. It had been Miss Sissons' go-to phrase when she didn't know the answer to a question, or wanted to keep the children in the classroom on tenterhooks about something. "What about the vanishing?" Manita then asked. Sophie took a deep breath. "That was my fault," she admitted. She didn't realise it, but it was the first time that she had said it out loud since it had happened. "I promised Esmeralda something I couldn't deliver." Sophie twisted her foot round, and the stomach sensation made itself worse again. "Why?" Manita asked. "We were in an impossible situation, and we made what we thought was the right decision at the time. It turned out not to be," Clara answered, putting her hand on Sophie's shoulder to indicate that they were in it together, and that Sophie shouldn't be so hard on herself. Sophie's stomach eased off slightly. "We are truly sorry," Yasmin added. Manita looked upon the 3 girls and could see that they were all very sincere in their apologies. To Manita, all of this had happened years ago because of her training. The time with King had poisoned her mind in some ways, but now that she was getting answers that made sense, she seemed more relieved than anything else. Before anyone could say anything else, a beep went off on one of the monitors behind Miss Sissons. "Excellent," she said. "The first file is downloaded." "What does that mean?" Manita asked. Sophie and Yasmin looked straight at Clara, who just stared forwards, not reacting. "Just one?" Clara asked. "For now. Give me a bit longer, and I'll have the 2 that you have been waiting for," Miss Sissons replied with a smile. "I'd like them both together, please," Clara requested. "Certainly. I know you've waited a long time for this. Why don't you take Scope's newest member to Meliora to show her what it's really like?" Miss Sissons suggested. "You could even get Kingsley to de-age her at some point." "I don't know about de-aging," Sophie said. "If we do it for one, don't we have to do it for everyone?" "Manita is different, I think," Miss Sissons replied. "We can make her 11 like you lot, like she was this morning." Blank faces met Miss Sissons. "I just think there's something special about being 11. I wish you lot could be 11 forever." Again, the girls had no clue what she was talking about. "Oh, one day you'll understand," she chuckled. Manita was now even more confused. Just as they had started getting answers, the conversation had shifted, and she was going back to Meliora, and potentially made younger. Clearly the new people they were working with had a lot of faith and trust in her, and she couldn't ask for more than that. Sophie shrugged at Clara, who wasn't really paying attention, and Yasmin indicating that she thought Miss Sisson's idea was a good one. "I'll message Kingsley and ask him to clear it with Echidna first. Might be a bit weird if the same child who was destroying the place came straight back in." "So, their temporary implant came with a hard light system?" Yasmin asked, intrigued. "Yes, we've all sorts on the shop floor. You really should ask about more stuff, Yas," Miss Sissons replied, flippantly, and Sophie just smiled, thinking about how much research Yasmin had spent the last few weeks doing. "I quite like the cloning," Manita said. "It makes me different from you lot." None of the girls took it as an insult, and Miss Sissons smiled. "I'll see what I can do, but I can't promise what I make will be able to copy you that many times," she said, and Manita nodded in understanding. Miss Sissons then continued, "Why don't you change into what seems to have become the Scope uniform, this lovely purple top with black trousers, to show that you're all a team?" Miss Sissons said. "Good idea," Sophie added, and Miss Sissons immediately changed the clothes of Manita's avatar. She then looked down at her outfit, trying not to be disgusted. "Are you coming, Clara?" Sophie asked. With tears in her eyes, Clara looked at Sophie. "No, there's somewhere else I have to go first." "Where?" Yasmin asked. "Home," replied Clara. Sophie immediately understood what she meant by this and hugged her cousin tightly. In the blink of an eye, Clara vanished. She rematerialised in front of her old house, where she had spent 10 extremely happy years with her dads. Her avatar flickered between about 9 or 10 different faces before eventually settling on hers. This was becoming more and more common, Clara realised, and she knew she would have to raise it with Miss Sissons eventually. They had been her parents, and she loved them more than anything, and nothing was ever going to change that. Having walked through the abandoned front door around the house, she took one last look in every single room, and by the time she got to the living room, her eyes were awash with tears. She looked at the settees where her dads would sit and bicker about what they would do with life, the places they would go, and the things that they would do with their beloved daughter. There had been so much love in the house that Clara just laughed at the idea of them still doing it. She decided to stay in the doorway, as if she sat down, she might never want to get back up again. She patted the top of the settee and could only bring herself to say one thing as the tears really started flowing. "Thank you, Dads." Sophie had got the message that because she said Manita could be trusted under Scope's command, Echidna was happy for her to come to Meliora under close supervision from Sophie, Yasmin and Kingsley. As a result, the group zoned out to the front door of Meliora, where Kingsley met them and showed them in. Kingsley portaled back and took the zoned-out body of Alton King with him. Sophie noticed straight away how the beautiful landscapes had been completely ruined, and the epicentre was now just covered in debris and rubble. Zones that had previously stood separate had now fallen in on each other and were slowly engulfing one another. The desert was melting the snow, the skyscraper had collapsed in on the jungle, and creatures were now wandering round with battle wounds that were being attended to by any other creature that could muster any useful energy or experience. As the children walked through the destruction, all the creatures stopped and stared. Some growled at them, clearly not willing to forgive Manita, but having to hold back because of Echidna's orders. Sophie felt a bit nervous and could see that Yasmin was feeling the same. That was nothing compared to Manita, who was an arch-villain in the eyes of the Myriad. She was flinching and cringing at every slight movement. Sophie put her head down and headed for what had been the epicentre. In the middle of a pile of rubble, Echidna stood there. Still, her captivated audience watched on attentively as a group of human children crept very apprehensively through their destroyed home. "Have you brought her here for trial?" Echidna asked Sophie. "Leave this one to us. Kingsley will de-age her back to 11, and she will redeem herself by working with you to rebuild this place. Suffice to say, she has many hands," Sophie said with a bit of a smile towards Manita. "He's the one you want," Sophie continued, pointing at the still zoned-out figure of King, now lying prone on the pile of rubbish next to Echidna. "As you wish," Echidna replied. Echidna raised her arms and lowered them, and every creature in the vicinity sat or relaxed to listen to what she had to say. "The Kraken grows weak. We do not have long," she began. "What are we to do with the man who tried to bring about our destruction?" she asked, throwing it open to her congregation. "Lock him up," came a voice. "Kill him," came another. "Banish him to worlds unbeknown to us," came a final one. "Is that even possible?" Echidna asked, knowing that the underworld was sealed off. Lichen stepped forward and whispered something quietly so that no one else could hear him in her ear while looking at Kingsley. Sophie noticed this, but there was no way she would be able to find out what it was. "He's not ready yet," Echidna said back, and Lichen stepped back. "Make him pay how only you know," a final voice shouted. Cheers followed, and Sophie watched as mythicals all around her united in their calls for justice through the waving of makeshift weapons or shaking of fists. Yasmin then decided to take it upon herself to walk up to King and examine him. Echidna did not stop her and actually stepped to one side to allow Yasmin through. "If you take his implant out, he will be powerless, and you need not fear him," she said, confidently, stepping back to be with her group. Echidna immediately pointed out her hand towards King, and a snake started to grow from her middle finger. It grew to the length of her arm, and had black scales and piercing red eyes. The snake slithered towards King and entered him through his ear. King immediately let out a yelp of excruciating pain, and then sat up in a daze. The snake left his ear, holding a white ball that Sophie immediately recognised as an implant, but not a type that she had ever seen or heard of before. She didn't dwell on this, however. She was more distracted by the fact that she had never seen one taken out like that, and how it was even physically possible to do so. King took in his surroundings and straight away turned into a gibbering wreck. I'm sorry, my life's work, I just wanted to—" "Wanted to what?" Echidna interrupted, stroking the head of the snake that had grown from her finger while it kept hold of the ball in its teeth. After playing with the ball in its teeth for a few seconds, the snake bit down hard on it and smashed the implant into 1,000 tiny pieces, which fell to the floor in front of Echidna. She slithered forwards onto them to rub the implant's destruction in his face and to show him who was really in control now. King looked around him at the creatures vying for blood and the children he had once seen as the future, all looking at him with the huge sense of superiority that Echidna instilled in them. He could see now that there was no way out, and so he resigned himself to his fate, and so he staggered to his feet. "You have no idea. You have lived here in your pristine world," he began. "A world that you banished us to," Echidna interrupted, not even making eye contact with King, but toying with her snake. "What about them?" King shouted, pointing at the children. "They are as much to blame as I am. Look at the destruction they have brought." "They freed many of our kind, warned us of your coming, and have helped us to defend our world that you have sought to destroy," Echidna said, still very calmly, not even entertaining the ideas that King was trying to put across. "They killed your—" King began. Echidna knew what was coming and shot him an evil stare. The snake shot from her finger and launched itself at King again. It entered his ear once more, and King fell back to the floor in pain. He writhed about in agony, and Sophie found it hard to watch, but couldn't take her eyes off it. Echidna walked over to King as he continued to scream and beckoned Sophie over as well. Sophie could see King's eyes turning red amid the cries of pain and agony. "Are you going to kill him?" Sophie asked tentatively. Echidna turned to Sophie and, with a menacing grin, which was hiding fresh new pain and sadness, said, "Sophie, I am the mother of monsters." At that, Echidna withdrew the snake from King's ear, whistled, and the floor began to rumble again. Sophie and Echidna both stepped back, as they both knew what was coming. King stumbled to his feet once more, determined not to go out on his knees, and, as he did so, the ginormous figure of the Kraken emerged from behind him. Before King could turn and let out a scream, the Kraken had devoured him in one bite. It slid back into the water, and calm was restored again in the blink of an eye. Sophie looked back at her posse and saw that they were all standing with their eyes nearly bulging out of their heads, but she couldn't help but think the right thing had been done. Cheers went up from every creature as far as the eye could see, and Sophie felt a hand on her shoulder. As it did so, the crowd immediately fell silent. "This," Echidna shouted, "is Sophie Hardy and her friends. They are allies of ours. We listen to her and learn from her, and she will do the same from us." Another huge cheer went up. Yasmin ran to stand next to Sophie and bask in the moment. Sophie surveyed what she could see. Mythical creatures of all shapes and sizes, backgrounds and cultures were cheering for her. It was everything she ever wanted, and so much more. She should have been ecstatic, but all she felt was uncomfortable in her stomach, and the only thing she could think of was, what would Dad say? The Sophie Hardy saga was written and produced by M.R. Dale and narrated and produced by Leona Hall. If you enjoyed it and would like to continue to follow the adventures of Sophie and her friends in coming episodes, then please subscribe through one of the many podcast providers out there. The links for each of these can be found on our website. If you require more information, visit our many social media channels, or if you would like to purchase a copy of the book, then be sure to check out our website, www.sophiehardysaga.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy.